Okay, so welcome to the Ultra Running Sam podcast. Lauren Gregory.
Hello, how you doing?
Hello. So we'll see how we get on with technology. Yeah, second time lucky. Technology is against us tonight. Gremlins are in the system, but we'll do our best. So as I was saying in the first attempt to record, the second attempt now, you're fresh off a win at the Highland Ultra. Beyond the Ultimate Highland Ultra. But before we go into your races and everything, just tell us a bit about your history as a runner then, and how you got into ultra running and how you got to the point where you are now, winning ultras and stuff, and what it took to get where you are, and your backstory basically.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, probably like most people, I sort of ran in school just doing like cross country and that sort of thing. All kind of really short distance going into my sort of mid to late 20s, early 30s, and then sort of started just increase distance, and I do literally mean up to half marathon. And then actually I got involved with it's an American charity called I Run For, where they pair runners of any ability with children and young people. Mainly in America. I think they are sort of kind of expanding countries now, but they pair them with sort of young people who might have some sort of life difficulty that can be like a life-threatening disease, it can be learning difficulties, and the idea is that the runner just kind of pairs with their buddy, as it's called, and just makes them kind of feel special, and just they might do things like dedicate their runs to their buddy, they might sort of send them their medals, that sort of thing. So I really like the idea of that, so I signed up to it and eventually got paired with a boy called Braden in America. And Braden was born with cerebral palsy. He was born very prematurely, I think at about 31 weeks. He weighed 2 pounds when he was born. And when at the time that I was paired with him, he was about 14 years old, and his mum was a single mum struggling on her own. She was just trying to he was 100% dependent, well still is 100% dependent on his carers, and she was trying to save her pennies for a proper sort of wheelchair van, because she was still lifting him in and out with her own might, and she's only sort of a really small person. So anyway, I sort of decided that I wanted to just help raise some money towards that. And a friend had said to me, if you're going to go big on the fundraising, you need to go big on sort of what your efforts are that you put into it. Sort of things like cake sales are great, but if you're looking to raise thousands of pounds, that's a lot of cakes that you got to sell. So he said, let's do our first ultra marathon. I didn't even know what an ultra marathon was. I actually had to Google it, by which point I didn't actually talk to him for about 3 days. I was just like, nope. I hadn't even ran a marathon at that point. I'd done, I think, maybe 2 half marathons. But I sort of pondered over it, and I thought, actually, yeah, do you know what? I need a bit of a challenge. And this sounds like the right thing for me. So we set to it. So we signed up to Race to the Stones, 100 kilometers, but we did it over 2 days. So we did the 50k, camped over, got up and ran the second 50k. We did it with a third friend got involved as well. So the 3 of us were Team Braden, and we raised £2,500 towards his wheelchair van, and his mum was able to purchase it a few months down the line. So that was really great. And that was meant to be like my only ultra marathon. I was like, I'm just doing this once. I just found it so hard, like all the training. I've got 2 young children of my own, so it was like a lot of time away from them. And then of course, when I was done with my training runs, I'd be exhausted anyway. So I'd just be like, let's just watch a film this afternoon on the sofa. They'd be like, Mum, let's go to the park. So that was that. But then we did the race, and I loved it and hated it in equal measure. And I was so proud of myself. It's the first time as an adult, or probably even in my life, that I really truly felt so proud of what I'd achieved. And also just kind of that feeling of doing something that I didn't think I could do really kind of sparked a bit of intrigue in me, a bit of curiosity as to what was possible. And at this point, I was really new to the ultra running community. Well, I wasn't even really part of it, to be honest. And I started following people and started realizing that there's all these incredible races all around the world. And I was like, my God, like this is like a whole new world to me. And I remember at the time learning about the Marathon De Sables, And when I first saw that race, I remember thinking, that is absolute hell on earth. Like, that is taking it too far. You know, like, why would anyone want to do that? But then as kind of time went by, and with things like Instagram, which paints very pretty pictures on your grid, I found myself sort of being drawn into it a little bit. So literally a few years, I think it was 2019, finally I got pulled in and signed up to it. And so between 2015, when I did Race the Stones, and when I finally sort of signed the dotted line for Marathon De Sables, I put in quite a few different ultra marathons, including 100 miler. I'd done, you know, just a range of ones really. I was just sort of kind of dabbling with it all and just trying to figure out what was out there. But so the Marathon De Sables was way above anything that I'd done to that point. In the same year, I'd actually won a sort of a lottery ticket for the CCC, one of the UTMB races. And that was actually a gin fueled entry. I hadn't even actually heard of it, if I'm entirely honest. I'd heard of UTMB and I'd followed it. I didn't realise there was all these sort of like smaller races. Not that CCC is a particularly small race, but you know, I didn't realise there was a series of them. And I saw everyone like on Instagram saying, "Oh, put my entry," and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" Like a few gyms. I was like, "Oh, I've got UTM." I didn't even know what UTMB points were. I sort of went list. I was like, "Oh my god, I've got some." Chuck an entry in. What are the chances? Slim to none. Like 2 weeks later, get an email saying, you know, "Well done, you're in." So I was like, "Oh," no. So that was like probably like the worst hangover ever. Getting that email 2 weeks later. But yeah, so anyways, in like 2019 I did the CCC, so that was kind of at that point like my biggest race, and I trained. It was the first race that I really properly trained for. I took on a coach for it. You know, I really realized that actually I kind of throw myself in the deep end now, and you know, I needed some direction and structure and guidance and accountability as well. Hence why I took on a coach. But yeah, and then the following year I was due to do the Marathon De Sables, did all my training, put in my peak training week, and then got an email to say that there was this weird virus doing the rounds and we're going to keep an eye on it, and that, you know, they're putting in extra medical care, but we think it's going to be fine. And then literally 2 days later did a U-turn and said it's all off. And I remember being at my daughter's, she does acrobatics on a Saturday, and I remember kind of just sitting outside watching and reading it, and all the mums, and I was just like the tears. I was like, oh my god, this is awful. I can't believe this is actually happening. So yeah, it was cancelled or postponed until the following September, you know, because of course at that point everyone was like, well, COVID's, you know, it'll be done by then. Of course it wasn't. So long story short, I was meant to do it in April 2020. I finally got out there in October 2021, and it had been postponed 3 times during that time. So yeah, finally got out to the desert. So it was a really long emotional build up, because there was all these highs and lows, and is it on, is it not? It literally got to the point where every time I said it was on, I was like, it's not. Like, and I sort of go through the motions of training, but I'd kind of really lost that passion and drive for it, because I was just like, you know, it's, you keep building up to it and then it doesn't happen. So
but how did that turn out in the end?
Well, so the Marathon De Sables is normally in April, but this particular year they did it in October, which is the first time they did it on October. And of course it's the end of the summer, so the desert is like extra hot by the time it's had the whole summer to heat up. So when we got out there, we were told that there was a heat wave in the Sahara Desert, and to expect very high temperatures. So I think day 1 was something like 51 degrees. I can't remember, I did write them down somewhere at some point, but basically every day was 50 plus degrees. The second day, which was like the June day, they measured 56 degrees inside the dunes, where sadly one of the competitors actually lost his life. And then to add to all of it, there was this horrible bug that was sweeping the whole camp, which wiped out, I think, 48% of the original field. People DNFing. It was horrendous. It was, I mean, genuinely, I sort of was pretty disturbed by it all at the time. It was pretty traumatic. But somehow, I don't know how, I don't think it's luck. I did train hard. I did do my heat training. I did train my pack, and I'm quite good in the heat. I've never quite ran in 50+ degree heat, but somehow I managed to pull off first British female that year, and I think I was 8th female overall. So I was really pleased with that. I never at any point expected to go out there to compete. It was very much a case of just getting it done. And the experience I had was far removed from my expectations in a really, really good way.
How did you live in the UK? How did you actually train for that? What was your heat training regiment?
Yeah, so I was really lucky that so my dad actually lives in Spain. So about a month before, we were out on a family holiday, and I made sure I took my pack with me. So I did quite a lot of like sand training. I think it was around about kind of 30 to 35 degrees at the time. So I was kind of really lucky that I got sort of a week, 10 days of that in a month before. And then I sort of then try to kind of piggyback on that and try and keep the momentum going. Because the thing with heat acclimation is it can drop off really quickly. So there's no point doing it a month before and then not doing anything after that, because your body just readjusts back to sort of normal, UK temperatures. So I was fortunate in as much as that I'm a personal trainer, and one of my clients had not long before bought a sauna for their garden. So they were like, do our session, go and sit in the sauna. So that was one thing that I did. Had access to sauna. I also had access to sauna. I was a member of a gym at the time. I did like hot yoga was really good. And then our neighbour is actually a builder, so he loaned us like big sort of like insulation panels, and we built a hot box around the treadmill in the garden and filled it with heaters. So I did something every day for a month pretty much before, at least kind of 30 minutes. And then I would just do things like, if I was in the car, I'd get in the car with like full on 3 or 4 layers on hoodie, down jacket, whack the heating up and drive to work. Get to my clients literally like sweating. I was like, sorry. But they all knew what I was doing. They thought it was quite entertaining and quite impressive. So yeah, I just did that really.
That's like the Jim Walmsley technique, wasn't it, for his heat acclimation for Western States, was always to drive to the canyons with his windows up and no air conditioning on, so that he was like.
Funny enough, I saw Tom Evans do a similar thing when he did. I think that might be Western States actually, or was it Lake Tahoe? One of those. I remember him putting it on his stories, and at the time I was like, "Oh, that's bonkers." But then later on, it was very, very applicable to my situation. So yeah, I just sort of tried to do everything that I could just to get some sort of heat exposure every day before we went out there. And I think it really, it definitely helped. Nothing quite prepares you for 50+ degrees, but had I not done that, there's a very high probability that I might not have finished the race at all.
Yeah, it's amazing. I know. Heat acclimation does really work. I noticed that last year, when we had that really hot spell where it was like the few days where it was like late 30s, and then like we had that day that was like 40 degrees. That was like the couple of weeks leading up to me going out to Western States to do some filming, and I'm 100% sure that I would have really struggled if it hadn't been for the fact that it'd been really hot here, and then going out there, and it was only 30, to me it was hot, but here in 50 degrees in the Sahara, 36 degrees in the Sierra Nevada mountains, that would have destroyed me normally. But somehow it felt okay, because I've had like 2 or 3 weeks where it'd been like over 30 degrees in this country, which is unheard of normally, isn't it, for us, that kind of heat? But it's amazing how quickly your body gets used to it, and then you can sort of take that forward, and it was perfect, really. Even though I wasn't racing, I was there for selfish reasons.
No, definitely. I think it does absolutely help, and I'm actually doing a desert race later this year. In fact, Beyond the Ultimate, who did the Highland Ultra, doing their desert ultra later in the year, so I'll be doing all of the above again. So
are you going to try and do all of their race series then? All of the
No, it's not my intention to,
Yeah.
mainly because the jungle scares the absolute life out of me. We were talking about it. There's quite a lot of people who were doing the Highland Ultra, who have done the jungle, and I know John Shield, who you interviewed, who won it last year. Yeah, that's definitely not my race. I don't like spiders. I don't like snakes. I don't like humidity. I don't like being wet and cold. So literally, there's not really anything that appeals to me about that race. So yeah, for that reason, I won't to their global series. I don't know. The Ice Ultra does appeal a little bit. I'm terrible in cold though, like really terrible. But that's kind of the appeal. That really would be pushing my limits, I think, or at least testing.
Yeah. Do you pick races that because I know I'm really guilty of picking races that I like and races that are in my comfort zone. I have done for a long time, and I know that I need to get out of my comfort zone with things. Do you purposely do stuff out of your comfort zone, or do you have a bit of a niche that you like in ultra running?
Not so much now. I definitely do races now that are well out of my comfort zone, but for sure, for years, I played it safe. And every now and again, I sort of will just enter a shorter race just because I know I can sort of turn up and do it, and it doesn't require too much kind of forward thinking in terms of what I need to pack and mandatory kit and what type of training. But yeah, generally sort of like my bigger races are all with sort of outside of my comfort zone, because that's the appeal to me. Like I know I can turn up and do a 50k sort of undulating race, attempting something like the Arc of Attrition in January, which I DNF'd, was probably my biggest fear other than the Jungle Ultra, in terms of races. Unfortunately it didn't go to plan, but I'm pleased that I still got as far as I did.
Tell me about that then. Sort of what were your thoughts going into that race, and what was your plan? And then obviously it didn't turn out how you hoped it would. But what was your reasoning going into that race on how you were going to approach it?
Yeah, so again, it was one of those races. I heard about it probably like 3 years ago. A friend of mine has now done it 3 times, I think. And the first year, when I heard about it, I was like, God, that's just horrendous. Like, why would you why would you do that in January? It's cold, it's dark. But actually, and he DNF'd that year. And then he went back and completed it, and then he went back again this year and completed under 30 hours, because you get, I don't know if you know, but you basically get 3 different buckles. So you get one for completing it, which I think is silver. Then you get the gold, which is for completing under 30 hours. So the cut-off's 36. So anything between sort of 30 and 36, you get a silver buckle. Then you get gold for under 30, and then like the elite who do it under 24 hours will get a lovely sort of black buckle. But anyway, so he did really well at that. So I sort of, my kind of theory with it was that if it's really awful, he wouldn't keep going back. Like I can understand him going back to complete it after DNFing, but when he went back again, bit it last year, I was like, there must actually be some appeal to this race. So that was my way of thinking. That was my logic. So I did actually then sign up last year. It was post MDS. I took some time out after MDS, not from running, but just from doing races, because it had been such a long build up that actually there was like this massive like MDS shaped hole in my life for quite some time afterwards, and it took quite a lot of readjustment back to normality, and the fact that I wasn't constantly training with this pack and constantly unpacking and repacking and counting grams and counting calories, like all of that filled a lot of time in my life, and suddenly it was gone. So anyway, but I was ready for a big challenge, so I booked Arc of Attrition for like the following year, this year, and trained for it. I put in, took on a new coach back in October, Steve Hopwood, who's Zone 2 coaching. He's been brilliant, and yeah, I just really trained for it, and I felt so ready. I actually have completed only like 100 miler previously, which was the West Country Ultra back in, I think it was 2018, and it took me like 31.5 hours. Like that's quite a long time for a 24 hour for a 100 miler, obviously I think a lot of people try to do it in under 24 hours. That's kind of the goal, but I was not even close to it. But I got it done. But I was also injured, and it was very frustrating, and it didn't go to plan. So I've always had this real niggle with 100 miles. Like I've wanted to go back and just do it like properly and do it feeling strong. And I've DNF'd A100. I even went out and tried to attempt running 100 miles on my own one weekend, got to 70, and couldn't continue because my knee blew up. That was on the back of I'd already done 130 miles that week and then tried to do another 100. So in my defence, I pulled off 200 miles that week. That's my highest mileage week ever. So anyway.
Were you coached at that point?
No, funny enough.
I was going to say, because that would be like the coach's absolute worst nightmare.
Yeah, I know. I was doing it was the Centurion, during lockdown, they did like Centurion on that week, and they did a thing where you can complete any distance between 5k up to 100 miles. And so a friend and I decided that we were going to complete all of them, not just one or two. We were like, so we ticked off all of them, apart from the 100 miles. Anyhow, so lost my train of thought now. Where was I talking about? A1. Oh yeah, so I also had this beef with not really doing 100 miles. So I did put a lot of pressure on myself going to Arc Of Attrition, which helped because it meant that I wasn't missing a single session. I was really putting in a lot of legwork. Got there, started, felt really strong. Kept going. I've got quite arthritic feet, which do tend to pipe up. Sometimes they don't pipe up at all. Like they didn't bother me at all during the Highland Ultra, but on this particular terrain, by about 50 miles, they were pretty sore. I made a couple of really horrible mistakes as well. So basically, because of my feet, the way they are, they get really painful in the joints, and I can normally sort of control it with paracetamol. But obviously just going and going and going, and I we went through the night, and then so then I ended up with like really nasty blisters. So I got to, I think it was Land's End, and I went to the medics and said, like, can you just sort my feet out? And they were really helpful, but she looked at them and she was like, no, those aren't blisters, they're hot spots. And I was like, they are blisters, you need to drain them, please. And she was like, no, I'm just going to take them up. And I kind of just took her advice, and I wasn't sort of, I should have been a bit more sort of, a bit more adamant that she actually kind of drained them. So that was one issue, because actually there was no relief at all. So I just had like this weird.
Was that when you get like a big area of skin that is like one giant blister, and it doesn't look like it's a blister?
Yeah,
but you can feel it.
Yeah, so I definitely had that on like the outside of my feet, and then I always get them right on the ends of my toes. So like, and it's really gross because actually it's always the same two toes on my left foot. And I don't know why it's those two. They always get a massive blister right on the end. So actually, to look at it, it just looks like my toe. But if you look closer, there's a massive blister on there. Why I didn't drain it myself, I had actually earlier on, I had drained it myself, but I was like, I thought, medic, I need like a professional to kind of sort this out for me. So that was one thing that didn't, I should have been a bit stronger about. And then very stupidly, I took, so I don't know if you know how like HRT works. So I've started HRT back in October, not because I'm particularly sort of heavily perimenopausal. I'm 44 years old, so I am kind of the age where I can be perimenopausal. But I work with a lady called Dawn, who's Lasting Change. She's like a mindset coach, so I do a lot of work with her, and she suggested that actually some of the inflammation I was getting in my body can be due to perimenopause, because when your estrogen levels drop, estrogen's actually got anti-inflammatory effects. So it makes sense that you feel more inflammation in your body. And she was like, why don't you try HRT? Because it might just kind of help with your running and events. So I was like, yeah, I'm totally on board with that. So that's why I started it. So but with HRT, you have like 2 weeks of taking progesterone tablets and then 2 weeks without. And I was in the cycle of taking the progesterone tablets while I was doing Arc Of Attrition. Now I know that the tablets make you drowsy. You always take them at bedtime, and you sleep so well when you're in that 2 week part of the cycle. So my way of kind of preempting and managing that was, when I took them, was to take them with a massive hit of caffeine. in my mind, that was kind of weighing it out. Took the tablets.
Logic. That's like.
What's that? Sorry.
That's logical. That is
Oh
logical.
yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. I thought so. But anyway, we got to Minack Theatre, the Minack Steps, and I sat down. My crew were there, sat down, and it's pretty tight. It's like 50 miles in, so you're kind of halfway at that point, and it's like well into the night. You know, you've been going in the darkness since kind of 5 p.m.ish. I don't really have much idea of like timings, but I think it was probably about 1 a.m, something like that. And I remember kind of sitting down in my chair, sort of going into it was a real struggle. I just felt really lightheaded and really weak, but I thought I just need to eat something. So when I got there, I was like, I just want to have some proper like hot food rather than energy bars. And as I kind of looked up, I sort of sat with my face in my hands, and as I looked up, literally everything just swirled in front of me. And I was like, what was that? And I just thought, that's just me being a bit tired, that's all it is. And I remember thinking, don't say anything to anyone because they won't let me go. They won't let me leave. My crew won't let me leave if they know that I'm really, really dizzy. So I was like, let's just go. So I stood up, and as I stood up, I literally fell backwards. And of course they sort of like jumped in to catch me, and I was like, oh no, I'm not going to get away with this now. So anyway, I kind of insisted that I go. I was actually running with a friend, Paul, at the time, and Paul had said to crew, he was like, I'll look after her, you know, don't worry. So my crew was my husband and a couple of really close friends, one of which was Dawn, who's like my mindset coach, and they were all quite concerned. But anyway, so we carried on, and the next checkpoint was Land's End, which is only about 4 or 5 miles from Minack Theatre, but it's a really, I don't know if you've done that section before, it's a really horrible undulating.
I do know it, yeah.
Yeah,
it's horrible, isn't it? Some of those.
Yeah,
horrible,
you can see Land's End and you think, oh my God, it's there, like it's maybe a couple
It's
miles
there.
away. And then like 45 minutes later, like you're still going. It's like a mirage, it just keeps disappearing, and as you sort of drop down into the coves and back up again. I don't remember any of that section. And Paul, who I was with at the time, said to me afterwards, he was like, you were all over the place. He was like, you were zigzagging. And I was like, he said, you kind of look like drunk, basically. And I was like, yeah, well, I think progesterone did that. So yeah, my two big errors during that race was not kind of dressing my feet properly, and taking progesterone halfway through a 100-mile race.
Could you have done anything about, could you plan that any different then? Could you have altered when you were going to take the medication and stuff then, in hindsight?
I actually don't know, and I have thought about it, and there's been sort of much discussion about it. I mean, there are other ways that you can take progesterone, which I'm sort of now exploring, but rather than having to take the tablet. But you ultimately, at any point in the day that you take the tablet, it would have made me dizzy and lightheaded. I didn't know that's what it was going to do. Obviously I wouldn't have taken it at all, and maybe just kind of skip that day and hope that it didn't have too much of an effect. But I was sort of reasonably quite new to it all. I was, as I say, only started at the end of October, and this was like end of January, so I'd only had like sort of 3 cycles of it, and was still quite learning, quite sort of new to it, learning about it. So yeah, so between that and then my feet, so by this point my left foot was a complete goner. Like it was, I sort of limped sort of best part of 30 miles from St. Ives, and I was, you know, there were points where I could run and it felt okay, and others, like every step was agony. It blew up, it was big and swollen. I was a bit worried I should have done some sort of stress fracture. And then I got to Zena, which is just the most horrendous. I basically use it as a reference to like things that are hellish now. It's just that section coming to Zena is just the most horrible part of the route. It's quite notorious, you know, if you talk to anyone who's done the Arc, they'll all say Zena's horrific. And I just couldn't move fast enough. I just could not move fast enough at that point. And I got to Zena, and in my mind I was like, I can't get to St. Ives was the next checkpoint. And actually once you get to St. Ives, the cut-offs relax a little bit. They say that if you get to St. Ives, you can pretty much walk the remaining sort of 20-ish miles and get it done, you know, within 36-hour cut-off. And I was just kind of I was in a really bad way, but I was still on the fence. Like I was actually mentally very much still in the race. I was like, I will keep going until someone tells me to stop. When I got to Zena, I was in so much pain, and my crew was so good, because I was kind of just like, I was having a bit of a tantrum. I was just like, oh, I can't move fast enough. I was really frustrated and really angry, but I was still willing to keep going. And they, you know, they were like, you've got to go, like you've got to give it a go. And I was like, fine. And it was like, as soon as I made that decision, it was like all hands on deck. They were literally refilling my bottles, and they were like, go. And all the crowds at this point had sort of like, a crowd had formed around, and they were sort of waiting for the decision. And as soon as I sort of went, fine, I stood up and I was like crying. I mean, looking back, I must have looked such a state. But everyone like cheered, and they were like, come on, you can do it. I was like, I was off. I had like a second wind. And then literally got to the next section, and I was like back in pain. So limited insane, I was missed cut by half an hour, and that was me out the race. So sad times. I was a bit in a state at that point. I mean, realistically, had I made the cut off,
what were you? Yeah, the cut-offs are cut-offs are cut off, isn't it? You can't. There's nothing you can do about that, is there?
But I would have rather been.
What were your feet like?
Sorry, go on.
Carry on. Sorry. No, carry on.
No, sorry. I was just saying that I would have rather been timed out than quit on my own, because at least, and that's the only thing that sat really well with me ever since, is that I know I really did push to the very last step, to the point where it was agony. So I'm kind of at peace with that. I would like to go back and do it though. I would like to complete it, but not next year, maybe the year after.
Unfinished business.
Yeah,
definitely.
unfinished business.
What were your feet like? Because after that, because I had a flashback when you were talking about blisters to when I did the around the Isle of Wight ultra, and I got some horrific blisters. That was like early on in my ultra running career, and I'd not quite. I think I'd worn these Hokers that I'd got maybe for 2 or 3 runs, but never given them a real long run. So that's obviously like over 100k, and I realised that they were quite narrow, and I was getting a blister on both feet on the inside of where my big toe was, and the blisters were absolutely horrific. And because there's quite a few sections where you're running on sand, you'll obviously know about this, where sand just can get everywhere, can't it? You try and keep it out, but it'll still get into every single spot that you can.
Yeah,
you can find.
Your issues.
And then, so I had sand that had got into my blister, and I'd not realised that what had started off as a bad blister was just getting worse and worse and worse, because I'd not dealt with it, and it was full of sand, and it was obviously just rubbing in the sand. And I remember finding sand in when I'd had a bath and everything for like the whole week after that race, just kept coming out. Just sand had got inside me, basically, and spread around my feet.
Oh, that's actually made me feel a little bit weird.
Horrific. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I've got a picture of it somewhere.
I bet you did. Doesn't everyone, like every ultra will have like a little gallery of their photos, won't they? Of like all the times that they've like lost.
I've been all right though since then. Since then, I've been okay. I think I realised early on that I needed wide fitting shoes, and ever since then there was only one other race. I did an ultra in the Peak District. I think it was like a Maverick race, and I wore some Adidas Terex for the first time, breaking all the rules of wearing brand new trainers for a race. And I got where you get like, it feels like the whole of your forefoot is one giant blister, because it's just, my foot was sliding around inside my shoe, coming down like Jacob's ladder. It was just absolute the most pain I've ever been in a race, coming down Jacob's ladder. Like, you couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't do anything, just like literally like felt like I was walking on stumps coming down. And that was a race that I thought, I'll never run again in these shoes ever. And I think I got home and burnt them.
That bad.
Know they were new shoes.
Oh no. Yeah, I mean, definitely I've had major feet issues in many different races before. Like I seem to sort of, I mean, I'm quite good at my foot care because I've had so many issues. And then because my arthritis is normally kind of the thing that causes issues, and if that becomes too painful, then my gait changes, and then that's when I start to get really nasty blisters. But yeah, I mean, I've had some horrible. I did a race. It was actually only, I think it was like my third or fourth ultra. It was the wall, the Rat Race the Wall, which is like 70 miles of the God, what's it called? I want to say Hadrian's Wall. But I didn't realise it was on road. I mean, this is how little I used to research my races. I didn't realise it was on road until about 2 days before. Of course, I trained all on trail.
Because you imagine it being like a trail, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. But it is, I think only literally like 20% of it's actually on trail. But the day, so that was in like, I think June, July time, and it happened to be like the hottest day of the year so far that year. And it was just like there was a really high DNF rate, and it was all heat related, you know, heat stroke, dehydration, that sort of thing. And my feet just swelled up so much, and I remember like the blisters on them, like I've never experienced anything like it, and probably like it since, really, like not even maybe MDS, but basically I finished the race in a lot of pain, and I could barely walk the next day. My feet were really swollen, and it continued to be hot, so you know when it's hot you kind of swell a little bit anyway, don't you? So I sort of managed to get like an emergency appointment with a podiatrist who had come sort of highly recommended. And when I got there, she literally went, "Oh my God." She said, "I deal with a lot of ultra runners. This is bad." And I was like, "Oh, don't say that. What's wrong?" Anyway, she ended up having to drill holes into my toenails. Because basically the blisters were underneath my toenails, and sort of she explained that basically when you have your toenails a little bit too long, which is why it's so important to keep your toenails short, they catch the end of your shoe. So if you imagine that over X amount of miles or hours, you're basically bashing the nail into the cuticle. So there was loads of like trauma around the nail cuticle, and then a massive blister underneath the actual, between the nail and the toe nail bed. Oh my God, she actually drilled it, and it was disgusting. It's my best story, because actually as she drilled it, literally as the pressure released, it literally just spurted everywhere. It was great. It's one of those really disgusting.
Relief though.
God, the relief was unbelievable. Yeah, so that was nice. Sorry to listeners, I tell some pretty horrible foot stories.
No, it's good. It's a rite of passage as an ultra runner, isn't it? Yeah. To deal with foot issues and chafing. They're all the things that we have to deal with, and that's the reality of ultra running, unfortunately.
Yes, yeah.
Tell me about your arthritis issues, because you know obviously you know you're in your 40s, I'm in my 40s, I've got ongoing issues with all sorts of injuries and things going on. You know, as we get older as ultra runners, these things appear and we have to cope with them. You were talking about your HRT treatment for it. Have you seen the benefits of doing that then for the inflammation and everything?
Yeah, I think I have. Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit I was a little bit sort of dubious at first, because so I started end of October, and it was just kind of a bit of a slow burner, and I'd heard from other people who'd gone on HRT, it was almost like an overnight transformation. So I was almost expecting to kind of wake up one day and be like, I feel like 30 years younger. And when that didn't happen, but then also at the same time, I realized that was my only real kind of symptom of perimenopause. Like people talk a lot about like brain fog and sort of mood swings. Like I haven't really got any of that. Maybe a little bit of brain fog. It's easy to blame my scattiness on perimenopause sometimes. But so yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, a couple months ago, I actually nearly came off it because I was like, I don't feel like it's doing anything. Like I sort of, it's quite a lot for very little return. But actually, I've stuck with it, and I do now definitely feel the difference. I've got a really active job. I'm a personal trainer and a running coach, and I teach classes. And when I teach my classes, I do the class with them. So that's 3 quite sort of intensive sessions a week, on top of my own training, on top of demonstrating exercises and lifting heavy equipment and stuff like that with my clients. So, you know, there was a point not so long ago, maybe 6-7 months ago, where I was just so achy, like everything hurt. I literally felt like an old lady, like, you know that diagram, the famous of like the evolution of man, which is like the ape and then it's like comes up to man, like that's how I am in the mornings. Whereas I sort of get out of bed like an ape and then after a few steps I turn into a human. But yeah, so definitely it's helped, definitely. Like I mean, touch wood, I don't have any achiness in my joints and I haven't changed anything. The only thing I've started taking just recently, but I do take it really infrequently, or is I've started trying to remember to take things like turmeric and green lipped mussel, which is good for arthritis. But quite honestly, I can't remember the last time I took it, probably a good week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And I've done the Highland Ultra since then and come out literally completely pain-free. So I now really rate it, and I think it's a really important subject because it's still quite taboo. It's not talked about enough. That there has been a bit more exposure in sort of the last couple of years because Davina McCall's done a couple of big sort of documentaries on it. But for something that's so natural and happens to literally every woman, we're still learning a lot. You know, we're kind of in the early stages of learning just how many symptoms there are. I learned that there are over 40 symptoms of perimenopause that you just wouldn't necessarily put down to it. You know, we tend to kind of associate things like mood swings or kind of hormonal symptoms with perimenopause, but actually there's a lot more things like dry skin. Like I realized how much I'm scratching constantly because I've just got dry skin everywhere. Things like I get really dry eyeballs, so my lenses get really stuck in my eyes if I don't take them out, you know, at a certain time of day. That's a symptom of perimenopause. There's some really weird stuff that you just don't realize. So yeah, I mean, I do think, you know, for any sort of runner, whether you're an ultra runner or not, sort of 40 plus, if you're struggling with your running and you don't know why, it might be worth just going to see, you know, having a chat with a menopause doctor. And there's no shame. I think there's no shame in taking HRT at a younger age if it helps. I was a bit weird about it at first. I was like, I just didn't think I'd be taking HRT at the age of 44, but actually the average age of menopause is 51, but you can be perimenopausal for 10 years before that. I'm 44, so I'm well within that range. I'm not unusual. So yeah, I'm on a bit of a mission at the minute.
But if you
great awareness around it.
If you've seen the benefits though, you've seen the benefits, then you know there's more. You know, why not do it? Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely, I think so. And there's no harm in trying. Well, I say there's no harm. I know there is like some risk and some sort of controversy with things like breast cancer, but a lot of that was addressed during the thing that Davina McCall, and there's a lot more kind of studies and positive stats around that now as well. So I think it's worth exploring.
Yeah. So if you were to sort of give that advice then to younger ultra runners, should they be wary of signs of it then, do you think, of perimenopause, or just wait till you get to a certain age?
Sort of looking back, if I could give advice now to anyone in sort of their late 30s, early 40s, because I didn't do this myself, is that I would just start learning a little bit about it now so that you can be aware of any sort of signs or symptoms of it. Because when Dawn suggested it to me, when was it? Oh, I did a race up north in end of September, which was the Pilgrim Ultra, 100k along the St Oswald's Way, Northumberland. It's beautiful. I came out of that like so beaten up. I was just like, oh my god, my recovery was so long. You know, I've done loads of 100Ks, and this one wasn't a particularly hard one. You know, 100K is always going to be hard, but in terms of like terrain and elevation, it really wasn't much. But I came out really sort of beaten up out of it. And that's when she was like, you might just want to consider that this could be a drop in your estrogen. So it wasn't until that point that I even crossed my mind that I should be really perhaps just swatting up a little bit about the symptoms of perimenopause. So I would just say to someone now, you know, if you're running, you want to continue running and you still feel like you've got a lot ahead of you, just start just being aware, that's all. Reading up on stuff, follow a couple of accounts, you know, they've got you some useful info. And don't be ashamed. It's a natural thing. We all have to go through it, unfortunately. But it can be managed. That's the important thing. It can be managed.
It's probably just a very, very British thing, isn't it, to not talk about things like that?
Yeah, stuffy old Brits that we are.
Stiff up a lip. So, as far as your racing is concerned, then now, so did you feel that benefit of you know, kind of this new not new lease of life, but the benefits of it as you've gone into this? You know, you said you with the Highland Ultra that you didn't feel like you've got any issues with foot pain. Is that you can directly relate that to what you've been doing then?
I think it's definitely helped. Definitely, like this is the first race I've done in quite literally years where I've put in, well, I was going to say where I've put in an effort as big as I have done. I mean, actually, if anything, this is the biggest effort I've put in, and come out literally feeling fine. Like I've been for a run this evening and it was fine. My legs feel good. Whereas previously, and again, not until that long ago, as I just mentioned, I've done a much sort of easier, shorter effort, and it's taken me ages to recover, and I've just felt so sore, like, so tired. I think there are other things that contributed to that. Things like my nutrition's got a lot better in the last couple of races that I've done, because that's another area. When you interviewed Kelsey, that really resonated with me because I'm also recovering bulimic. And whilst it's not so much an issue now, it has caused me issues in races before where I've just not wanted to eat that much. But I've really worked on that in the last year or so. So I think that's definitely helped. My hydration strategy is a lot better as well, because that's also caused me issues in the past. When I did MDS, I got really dehydrated and then ended up with a water infection on the long stage, which nearly took me out of the race. So I've had many hard lessons along the way, but I've sort of, learned from them and then sort of taken them forward, so that it doesn't happen again. But yeah, I think definitely sort of HRT is one of a few factors that have contributed to me coming out of Highland Ultra feeling really good, and during the race as well, I felt really strong throughout. Yeah.
Brilliant. So tell me about the race then. So for people that are watching or listening that don't know the format of the race, could you sort of explain how, where it is, what the stages are and everything?
Yeah, sure. So it's Highland Ultra is a race put on by Beyond the Ultimate, and their speciality is putting on races, like multi-stage races in either quite extreme or remote environments. The Highland Ultra is the only UK based race that they do. It's 125 kilometers over 3 days, and it was about, I think I clocked about 14,500 feet in the end over 3 days, but much of that's done in the second day. So the second day is sort of like, the distance wise it's actually shorter than the first day, but there's punchy elevation on it, so it took about an hour longer for me to get day 2 done, and a much sort of bigger effort in terms of elevation and terrain, because the terrain's really tough in the Highlands, like so many bogs, which is sort of quite energy zapping. So it's 3 days self-sufficient. You camp, so you have your tent provided for you, and that's it. So you've even got to get your own water. Like they actually give us, so you take your own flasks, but then they actually gave us a filter bottle so that we can fill out of like rivers and waterfalls and things like that. And there's no shortage, there wasn't any point where I was like, oh God, where's the next water source going to be? You're always surrounded by, rivers and things like that. So so it's all kind of carrying everything on your back, all your mandatory kit, sleeping bag, food, clothes, everything that you need. The only thing you do get extra is you get a night bag that you get at the end of each stage, where you can change into like, you know, a set of dry clothes. So yeah, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. It's so remote though. It's in Knoydart in Scotland in the West Highlands. It quite literally took me much less time to get to the middle of the Sahara Desert than it did to get to Knoydart in Scotland. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. So I had a car journey to the airport, and then I took a flight, and then I took a bus, and then I took a 5-hour train journey, which is actually a really beautiful train journey. It goes over the I'm going to get shot for calling it the Harry Potter Bridge because there is an actual name for it, the viaduct. It's a really spectacular train journey, and then had an overnight stop in the hotel, and then you get a ferry across to Knoydart. So from Mallaig to Knoydart, because you can only access Knoydart by boat. So yeah, it's quite the journey to get there, and then you got the race itself. So 3 days, and then you got to get back. I actually managed to get back in one day rather than an overnight stop. But yeah, so it's a fantastic race. My first experience of Beyond the Ultimate. I'd heard lots of good things about them previously. The race director, a guy called Chris King, is a really good ultra runner himself, so he knows what his runners require. And you know, there's lots of sort of nice kind of little quirky things along the way. Like the medals are really cute. There's basically word medal. I don't know, mine's in my car actually. It was like show and tell say I took it to work. And then yeah, just things like that. And then you get like a really cool like after party where they had like a ceilidh band and they put on like burgers and curry for us afterwards. So it was just a really lovely experience and a great adventure, and really tough. Like it wasn't by any stretch easy. That was not an easy win, you know, because aside from the elevation, the terrain, you know, the course profile, the course characteristics, I was also up against a very fast other runner who came in second, and she was very strong on hills and was constantly hot on my heels. So there was never really any kind of room to just back it off a little bit. You know, sometimes just like, I'm just going to put some music on. I was like, oh my God, she's literally constantly there. Yeah, so yeah, it's good. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really buzzing to have got the first female.
Amazing. That's a good result. They're a good bunch of lads and girls, aren't they? The Beyond the Ultimate people. You know, Chris from the Spine and everything, and Jenny was up there. Jenny Hall.
Yeah,
Jenny's lovely.
Yeah, she's so
lovely Jenny. Hi, Jenny. So, she's great. Yeah, she is great.
Yeah, they're all a great band. Really nice. Yeah, and you know, really, they genuinely looking out for your best interests as well. You know, they want you to complete the race, and in the safest way possible. Obviously, they don't want any injuries out.
It's quite a big undertaking, isn't it? Going and putting on a race in such a remote place that.
Yeah. Well, they were saying that out of all their races they put on, bearing in mind that they've got like the Peruvian jungle, the Swedish Arctic, there's the they're about to do the mountain ultra. They said actually logistically the one in Knoydart is the hardest because restricted by, you know, there's not really any road access, and you've got to get ferries at certain times.
And weather as well. The weather could affect that.
Yeah, because that's right. Because actually, the weather is you're on a peninsula, like quite a sort of a mountainous peninsula. So the weather changes all the time. We didn't get anything particularly extreme, thankfully. Well, I say that. I mean, we had a lot of rain on day one, which meant we were all soaked through, and then that continued tonight. So actually, we couldn't dry our clothes. So it was pretty horrible waking up in a freezing cold damp tent just to then put on wet clothes for the next day. That definitely sort of lowered my mood a little bit, but yeah, like the first morning we woke up and there was actually like just a little sprinkling of snow on one of the higher peaks, which fortunately we weren't actually going that high that day, but it was kind of a bit of a wake-up call that, you know, the weather can change very quickly out there. So yeah, it's just kind of
what was the kit like for that then? Bearing in mind that you'd have to be prepared for all kinds of weather. Is it as strict as other winter races?
It's quite an extensive kit list, and took up more weight than things like my food. I mean, food is obviously part of the mandatory kit list, but yeah, just you've got to have obviously things like a proper bivvy bag, not just a sort of one use sort of chuck away one. You know, several extra layers in case it gets cold. You know, warm hat, 2 pairs of gloves, medical kit, and then minimum 2,000 calories a day. Mine was closer to 3,000, but I actually managed to keep my weight, my food weight quite low, but actually my pack weight was really low, because I think having done MDS, I was really anal about weight, to the point I was literally just taking out anything that I didn't need. So I actually ended up with a reasonably low, I think I started with a 6.9 kilogram pack with like all in. But things like so one of the things I regret not doing is I had a camping mat, which I had in camp 1. So basically the race is you do, so day 1 is a point to point. So you're then in camp 2, then you do a loop, come back to camp 2. So it's nights 2 and 3, you're in camp 2, and then you run back to camp 1. So basically I left my mat in camp 1, thinking I'll just sort of rough it without, because I did in the desert, I didn't have a mat in the desert, and I was like, if I can sleep on the desert floor, I'll be fine, and like a nice soft grassy floor, not really taking into account how much colder it is without that. It's obvious now when I talk about it, but I was sort of a bit too hung up on sort of weight cutting, and then ended up compromising comfort and of course the quality of my recovery. So that was one thing that I would definitely change now, for the sake of taking an extra, whatever amount weighs, 300 grams.
300 grams.
Take that a bit. Yeah, so so that's one thing I would definitely change if I was to do it again, or do another multi-stage race, which I will be doing obviously in November. But yeah, it's a great race there. I mean, I fully recommend it to anyone. They're just such a great team, and it's such an adventure, and I love multi-day because you get to know people better, rather, you know like the trail, like, so the trail stroke ultra running community is quite close knit anyway. Like, you can do a race and sort of share a few miles with someone, and next thing you know, you're like lifelong friends, which is great in itself. But when you're sort of spending several days with the same people, and you're kind of going through a few highs and lows together, it becomes that much more meaningful. And then it's a small field as well, and as I say, there's only sort of 50 runners, so I can't say I got to know all of them, but definitely, I'd say probably at least half I knew the names of, to be able to sort of chat to and give them a big hug at the finish line. So yeah, I love it for many reasons.
Yeah, it sounds like it's definitely like a bucket list race for people in the UK, definitely.
Yeah,
sounds,
I think so.
One for the list.
More remote.
What have you got planned for the future then? What races have you got your eyes on in the near future, and what sort of like in the down the line are you planning on doing?
I'm actually doing UTS 50 next weekend, which is slightly
worrying.
My race planning wasn't particularly great on this occasion. I got caught up in like the romance of doing these 2 races, and then realised they're only 2 weeks apart. Hopefully I'll be all right, because actually I feel pretty good coming out of Highland Ultra, and I've got another sort of 10 days or so to sort myself out. So that's next weekend. Then actually I've got nothing booked until the Desert Ultra, which is in November. Not to say that I won't be doing anything. I think if anything, I'd just quite like to do a couple sort of more like personal challenges. So I've got a really close friend, Helen, who's also an ultra runner. She's quite keen to do I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, I think it's the Like Wake Way. It's like from one side of Yorkshire to the other, and it's about 40-ish, 42 miles, something like that. So we kind of sort of penciled in a weekend to do that, the idea being that we would do it over 2 days. But then Helen was like, would it be crazy to do one way, sleep over, and then run back like 80 miles in a weekend? And I was like, I'll think about it. We'll probably do it, because it's the sort of stupid thing we would do. But so there's that. And then then actually nothing booked, but long term, I'm now really keen to do the Rangers run that Beyond the Ultimate do, which is in Kenya, I think. And it looks incredible, and having just spent time with people who've done it or are doing it, That's definitely a bucket list item. I followed the race last year they've been on the Ultimate socials, and you just see like these extraordinary images of like the runners, and there's like these giraffes just literally just running alongside them, and then they're in camp, and like these like like elephants will just be kind of like a family of elephants just kind of looking in to see what they're doing. I was like, that's so extraordinary and so unique, and where else in the world do you get to do that under a controlled, safe environment? Because they have the rangers, like the park rangers there, looking out for the runners and making sure that nothing goes too awry. So definitely that. And I don't know, like I'm sort of reluctant to book too far ahead at the moment. I tend to put a lot of pressure on myself when I do these big races, and whilst that normally that works in my favour, when things don't go well, equally it really floors me, like it did with Arc of Attrition. So I don't know, I'm keen to do some I think probably a bucket list thing for me would be to do a bit of hut to hut running, like something like Dolomites or the Alps. Like I'm quite keen for that one. So I don't know, it's hard because I've got I've got a family, I've got 2 young children, so these are all things that I have to consider, and it's I can't sort of get up and
turn them into holidays.
Yeah, try and disguise family like a race as a family.
Tour de Gien. That's the one you want.
Yeah,
want to do.
I'm just staying on a long walk. I'll be back in a few days.
Back in a week.
So I mean, as they get older, perhaps I'll be able to do more of these things, but then obviously I'll be older as well. My body might pack in at some point, I imagine. But
no, keep going. Like I was saying to Kelsey, I just keep looking at Jeff Browning, Bronco Billy, and just see how he's still winning 100 milers in his 50s. So
yes. Yeah,
there's plenty of scope left for us.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's there are many older ultra runners who do really well. I think it's one of those things that you kind of, the more experience you have under your belt,
wisdom.
Yeah,
wisdom and the grey hair.
Definitely. I want to be one of those really old runners that you see like doing the 100-meter sprints in like 2 minutes, but still.
Always something to shoot for, always.
Okay.
Amazing. What we didn't talk about is some advertising for your Peak District thing that you're doing. Tell us about that.
Thank you. So I already sort of take out trail groups every now and again. I'm trying to make it more of a regular thing this year. I was trying to do it last year, but then one thing another happened. It didn't happen. But so I have got a lovely place booked in the Peak District, 30th of June for 2 days. It sleeps 10, well, there are 10 spaces. Me and a friend are taking up 2 of them. But yeah, there's 10 spaces available. In fact, there's 7 left because 3 are booked. So yeah, weekend of running and a bit of yoga in the Peak District, with good people. Hopefully we'll get some nice weather. We'll be barbecuing, a bit of a social as well, but just an opportunity to kind of meet like-minded people, get out on the trails where you might not necessarily ordinarily go on your own. All the routes are sort of plotted and planned. I've got sort of a small team of running leaders who'll be taking the groups out with me, so it's very inclusive, and and it's one of those things you can do as much or as little as you want. There'll be several runs on offer and sort of yoga sessions. You can just do 1 or 2 of them or do them all. It's totally up to you, but yeah, I mean, definitely there are spaces available on it. You can go to my website, which is www.laurengregorypt.com, and then if you go to the Trail Running Weekend page on there, all the info is there. So definitely be great to get some people joining.
Brilliant.
It's kind of how I want to move things forward, as that sort of part of my business. Is I'd love to do more sort of trail running weekends and potentially take them abroad at some point. There's some great places abroad, so
that'd be great.
Start low key in the Peak District first, and then
there's nothing wrong with the Peak District.
I love the Peak District. It's only a couple of hours away from me. I live in sort of flat Warwickshire. We've got Burton Dasser Hills, but it's a relatively small area. So I can get to the Peak District in a couple of hours. I'm definitely due a visit. In fact, I'll be going soon just to try and recce some routes for this weekend. But yeah, it's a great playground.
Yeah, definitely. I have. I'm quite fortunate that I'm only about 15 minutes from the edge of the Peak District, so I can get to Dovedale and the Dales like within about 15 minutes.
Oh, you're so lucky.
So it's just nip up and go a few blasts up Thorpe Cloud in
Nice.
Dovedale.
Yeah.
It's handy having it so close. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very envious. Yeah, well.
So for people that want to sort of get in touch and follow you, then it's Lauren Gregory PT on that's what you are on Instagram. Are you on Facebook as well?
I am on Facebook even. I can't even pronounce it. Again, Lauren Gregory Fitness Coach. I think I am on Facebook, and then my website, as I said, is laurengregorypt.com. So yeah, I'm probably
Find everything on there.
Instagram user than anything else, but yeah.
Right. So if people want to follow you and get in touch and get themselves booked onto the Peak District weekends, that's the place to go.
Yeah, definitely. I always sort of reply to messages and DMs. So if anyone's got any questions or inquiries, like just by all means get in touch and we can chat it through.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thanks for coming on and talking and sharing your grim stories of blisters.
No, I'm sorry. You can always count on me to drop the tone. I try to be fair. That was quite mild, to be fair.
The reality.
Stories I could tell. I thought I was quite well behaved tonight.
Yes. There's always worse stories that we could tell. Definitely. Yeah, the life of an ultra. Awesome. Thanks for coming on, Lauren. Appreciate you giving us your time.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on. It's been great chatting.
Thank you. Cheers.